Welcome back to Teen TV Deep Dive. Here on this channel, we talk about all things Teen TV. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the biggest shows at the moment, and that is Euphoria. The show doesn't take much explanation, but I just wanted to give you guys a quick heads up that we will be talking about everything that happens this season. So, if you have not watched season 3 in its entirety, you will receive some spoilers. So, just a heads up. Season 3 picks up where there has been a time jump and everyone is an adult now. And I'm going to be discussing characters from what I feel like is least significant to most significant to the plot. So, first, I wanted to talk about Jules. Jules has dropped out of art school to go into sugaring, and I would consider her to be the most isolated out of everyone, even though she pretends that it's by choice and that she's happier doing this. I don't necessarily feel like that's right. We see that since Jules has met this man who she particularly hit it off with, and he's super rich, but he does have a family and he really wants to protect his family. So he pays and affords Jules' entire lifestyle, but she has to stay in this penthouse. She doesn't really hang around many people. She literally just gets to see him occasionally on his terms. And so I feel like Jules, out of everyone, has the most like aesthetic life and visually appealing home out of everyone. But at the same time, she is pretty empty on the inside. She, like I said, she doesn't have anyone around her. She doesn't necessarily have a purpose. And even when we see at the conclusion of the series, we don't really have any closure to her character, which I feel like kind of did her a disservice. We see that this whole time of season 3, we haven't got much development for Jules, even though there was so much time building upon her character in seasons 1 and 2, and even her backstory as well. I was kind of confused as to why we didn't see a more definitive end to Jules's character. Moving on to Lexi. Lexi is now a writer in Hollywood and she's still somewhat dissatisfied with her life. She has an entry level job and she's still working behind the scenes. And as we saw in season 2, when Lexi directed and wrote a whole play, that she isn't as shy and as much of a wallflower as people in high school perceived her to be. So for her to still be kind of in this more limited space in her adult job is somewhat expected, but also we know that it's not truly fulfilling Lexi. Lexi does have a crush on this celebrity that works on the set of the show that she works at, but she refuses to make a move. And overall, with Lexi's character, I really liked her in the previous seasons because she seemed a lot more logical and rational in comparison to a lot of the other characters. But it seems like as we grow into adulthood, Lexi has really grown attached to being the logical one, being the responsible one out of everyone. That it seems like she only wants to stick around all of her high school friends because it makes herself feel good. Like, even though she might not be as important at her job as she'd like to be, at least she's not Cassie, at least she's not Rue, at least she's not Maddie. So I feel like Lexi's character has kind of shifted her to be a little bit too self righteous to the point where she's becoming annoying. I think it's safe to say that all of these characteristics that we attribute to Lexi's character and her personality do stem from her childhood. I think so many character analysis really hone in on the Howard family's dynamic when it comes to discussing Cassie's character and her motivations, but I feel like it has also shaped Lexi, but almost in a different way. We see that the Howard's mom has always been very detached and neglectful, and she only seems to want to tap into their lives when the girls are in the spotlight. And for Cassie, that comes a lot easier than it does for Lexi. So we see that Lexi doesn't really have that connection with her mom. And then with their father, he seemed to really have a connection with Cassie, and that's something that she really valued. But once again, Lexi does not have a parent that she can connect with, so she's gotten used to not having parental guidance and the support that she needs from her parents to grow up the right way. we see that Lexi kind of depends on herself to hold herself accountable to always do the right thing because she's had to grow up with the lack of parental presence in her life. We see in this season Lexi and Cassie still have some moments where they're together. I would say out of all of the entire cast ensembles that we see, Cassie and Lexi spending lots of time together has still been pretty consistent. And so with that, we still see that Lexi is still sick of being in Cassie's shadow. And that causes some tension in their relationship while they've never been close. It just caused them to rift apart even more. But by the end, we see that Lexi is now all of a sudden interested in the Bible. And as we get into Rue's character and some of the comments that Lexi would make towards Rue for being interested in the Bible and religion is very interesting, but also Lexi's perspective of the Bible. I don't think she necessarily took it as a religious awakening for herself personally, but I feel like Lexi, after reading the Bible, she took away like the same moral lessons that would be very similar to reading a fictional book or like classic literature, which I thought was very interesting, but also very on brand for Lexi. Moving on, I wanted to talk about Cassie. Cassie is now a stay at home girlfriend to Nate, and they're engaged. And quickly enough, they get married, and suddenly at the wedding, all of their business comes out. We find out that Nate owes these mysterious people a lot of money, and now their marriage is already over before it fully began. Now Cassie's panicking. She feels like she can't really get the security in life and the life that she was really looking for with wanting to be with Nate, who's someone who's so successful at such a young age. She's really confused and she's stirred up inside because Cassie has always prioritized getting male validation and her looks and things like that. She never really prioritized having a career or making a life for herself independently. She's always worked towards making sure she found a way into Nate's life and the things that Nate worked for, he would provide for her. So now we see that Cassie starts an OF page, and this is going to be her source of income. Honestly, I feel like it's not surprising that this is Cassie's life after she went into high school because one, we've seen that Cassie has never really saw any skills within herself that would be useful in a practical job. She's always really been motivated by attention and spotlight, and being any entertainment figure or public figure, you're going to do that. You're going to get attention and you're going to profit off of how you look, this persona that you embody for everyone. And so for Cassie, this seems like this is the natural step for her. Overall, we see with Cassie's life now, even though her and Nate ended up in a bunch of debt, she just continuously falls upwards and it's kind of annoying. And I try to understand Lexi's frustrations that she has with her because, for instance, Cassie started an OF page, and of course, it comes with a lot of negative stigmas and things like that. But for whatever reason, Cassie ended up landing a job at Lexi's place of work on the set that Lexi works at. Cassie ends up getting a job there. And then it's just like time after time after time, we see that Cassie is still able to move recklessly, but things still work out for her. And even by the end, while Cassie doesn't have all of the attention that she would like, and that's something that she's valued for so long, we see that everything else, like shelter, food, a source of income, all the things needed for survival, Cassie has that. And it's pretty hard for all of the other characters to say that they have the same in this season. Moving on to Maddie. Maddie has reconnected with Cassie as she is a talent manager. And Maddie is someone who we sees that her life isn't as glamorous as it seems. We see that Maddie is at red carpets. She's hanging out with the most famous influencers and up and coming actors in Hollywood. But Maddie is struggling to make ends meet, and she goes home to this basement style apartment that isn't what you would imagine for Maddie Perez. So with Maddie, she ends up taking on Cassie as this talent manager, and Maddie essentially sets Cassie up for success. She gets her into all the right spaces, talking to all the right people, posting all the right things on her page, and she quickly takes this manager role, but it almost seems like Maddie is a little bit more controlling than what a typical manager would be. Overall, season 3 starts to tap into Maddie and Cassie's very toxic relationship all over again. I know that they've both had their ups and downs with their individual relationships with Nate, but I feel like the true toxic love story of this series has been Maddie and Cassie. For whatever reason, they continue to come back and do whatever it takes to be around one another and to support one another. But when it comes to day to day and doing right by each other, they just cannot do it for whatever reason. They don't respect one another. We see that Maddie, as she starts getting more and more experience managing people in a certain type of field, she starts working with a new character, Alamo. Alamo is someone who we're going to get into later. And we see that Maddie quickly spirals down at what she first thought was the new hot market to work in when it comes to talent managing. She quickly finds out that there's a dark side to it, and she realizes that soon enough it might not be for her. And once again, Maddie low-key gained nothing this season. We never saw if she was going to become financially stable. She actually ended up getting fired from her more consistent job that she had as an assistant. So, as much as we all love Maddie and think that she's so iconic, her character didn't really have an iconic, satisfying ending for me personally. As I was saying, Alamo is a new character that we're introduced to this summer. He's actually Rue's new boss, and he owns this club. He's just a very calculated and secretive guy, and we'll find out that this ultimately leads to a lot of destruction and chaos later throughout the season. Now moving on to Nate. Nate, out of high school, should be the man on paper. He has his own construction company. He owns this really big house. It's not the most beautiful, but it's really huge, and it looks like it's in a pretty expensive neighborhood. But we find out that Nate, like I said, him and Cassie are in a lot of financial debt because Nate owes some people money. So now at every turn you get, Nate is constantly having to get beat up by all of these people because he owes them money. And overall, we see in this season, Nate is still afraid to go into his dad. We actually see Nate and Cal have this one on one conversation where Cal is pretty much in the state of life where he's accepted who he is as a person, all of his rights, all of his wrongs. He doesn't care and he owns up to them. And it seems like him and Nate have been able to work towards having a more amicable relationship with one another because Cal now has this openness and this acceptance of who he is. While Cal has reached this really peaceful state of life, we see that Nate is still working really hard to not turn out to be like his dad. We have seen in the earlier seasons where Nate is super quick to react and he has these really explosive moments when he's upset with around other people, and just him being a very angry and vindictive and aggressive individual. We see now that this season, Nate is fairly soft spoken. He thinks before he speaks, and he actually treats Cassie with a lot more respect than we've seen him treat her in the past, or even with Maddie as well. And I don't know about you, but this season I was wondering what happened to Nate Jacobs. Why is he like this? Are we going to get a flashback to what he was doing over the time jump to see why he's like this? Is it a whole act? Does Nate have a secret life that he lives, but he doesn't want to upset Cassie, so he does everything right and he's the perfect fiance to compensate for that. We I don't really know. And we actually never get to find out as we see Nate, him being greedy for the perfect life and conning all of these people out of money. It ends up leading to his demise. And Nate is actually one of the first characters in the main cast to go. Honestly, I would say with this ending, I was pretty surprised. During the episode, I kind of saw it coming, but just initially going into season 3 and watching the first couple of episodes, I definitely didn't expect Nate to be the one that has to go. But I was ultimately very dissatisfied with his ending, and we had so many storylines just went down the drain. We never know why Nate was suddenly calmer. Was it just a natural progression as he got older, or was it his double life, like I said? His whole storyline surrounding his repressed sexuality, we still don't know anything about that, and Nate was never really given the opportunity to explore that. And we never know why Jules has been the most genuine connection that he's ever had. They touched on it in the wedding episode, but it's not something that was fully explored. We see that Nate and Jules had a very rare interaction where he just says, "Thank you for coming." And it's just weird and a lot of unspoken tension that lingers in the air that never fully gets explained. So, with Nate passing away, I've never been a big fan of Nate, but just so many questions that were left unanswered is why I kind of wanted him to stick around. Lastly, I'll be talking about Rue. Lori found her. We see that season 2 ended where Rue squandered all of Lori's materials, and so now she owes her a bunch of money, and Lori has forced her to become a mule. And we also see that Rue is really interested in finding religion. We see that while Rue is on the run, she ends up staying with this family from Texas, and they have minimal connection to the internet and they're very religious. And she sees that this family is super happy and they have this super peaceful and slow life. And so, honestly, Rue wanting to turn to religion is very fair. When she saw the family and saw like this perfect life that they had, while Rue also being at such a low point in her life, and it seems like no one can help her, it makes sense that she's looking to higher power to give her a sense of hope again. But things change, and Rue ends up leaving Lori and she starts working for Alamo. And Alamo has this really unique quality about him where he treats Rue as if she has autonomy. But honestly, I feel like she has even less freedom or even just margin for error with Alamo than she did Lori. I feel like Lori gave Rue a lot of room to kind of push back and she didn't actually have to kiss up to Lori. But I feel like Alamo has this really weird dynamic with respect and people like looking down on him, quote unquote, even though they actually aren't. So I feel like while Alamo is like more charming and he's a lot more funny than Lori is, I feel like Rue doesn't really have much room to slip up. Overall, for this season, it seems like Rue is just facing the consequences of her actions. Squandering Lori's material, she has to work as a mule. She gets free from Lori from the help of another person, but now she's indebted to Alamo and she has to work for him. We see that Rue is driving super irresponsibly on the road. She gets pulled over by the police, and now she's working in cahoots with the DEA. She treated Jules really bad during her relapse in season 2, and now Jules doesn't want a relationship, and she honestly barely wants anything to do with Rue. And so, like I mentioned earlier, Rue does start working with the DEA, and the plan is for Rue to turn everyone in, both Lori's people and Alamo's people, and she's going to set herself free from this dark life that she has, and she's going to start over. But Lexi's judgmental tendencies leads them to get into a fight, and word travels back to Alamo that Rue is a mom. And so after this whole big trade happens from the border of Mexico to California, we see that Rue has technically fulfilled her duties to Alamo, and there shouldn't be a reason for him to be upset with her. And he doesn't. He never confronts Rue about her possibly working with the DEA or her possibly being a mole. While Alamo's had his suspicions, he never went forth with anything serious or made any serious accusations. He just used a lot of fear mongering tactics to try and get Rue in line or to see if he could shake her and make her tell on herself. But she never does. And so Alamo is really friendly, very friendly, when Rue comes back from this huge situation. And he actually tries to help her, and Rue's in a lot of pain because she went through it. And so he gives her some painkillers, and he like winks at her and promises that she shouldn't overdo it because we know of Rue's past and her with painkillers. He tells her to not overdo it, but it'll help with the pain. And Rue actually follows suit. She only takes the healthy amount, and she ends up passing away anyways. Rue's death scene was really emotional. I was crying the entire time, but I feel like it was just missing the right music. I don't remember if there was any music in general related to that scene, but what I found really beautiful about her final 7 minutes was that Rue spent so much of season 3 looking for peace and calm, and she even tried looking at it through religion. She thought having a purpose bigger than herself, starting a family, trying to be in a relationship with Jules. Rue was looking in all of these different places, thinking that that was going to bring her peace and calm. But her journey into the afterlife proves that she had found her place of peace all along, and that was in her childhood home with her family. So I thought that was kind of a full circle moment that made a really sad moment turn into a really beautiful one. Our last character that I wanted to talk about is our MVP of season 3, and that's Ali. We see that he's actually the only person that has shown proper grief to Rue. I know that there isn't one particular way to grieve her, but for everyone to have known Rue for all of these years, grown up alongside her, it seems like Ali is the only one who's shown genuine sadness about her passing away. And so we see that Ali shows up to the club to avenge Rue, and he ate down. He definitely shut it down with the help of Alamo's crew. And I just really appreciate Ali after the end of this series because he was the only person in the show that didn't give up on Rue. We see that her friends isolated themselves from her. Jules broke up with Rue. Even Rue's mom didn't want anything to do with her after a certain point in her struggle with addiction. So to see Ali be the steady person in her life even after she was gone was beautiful. So now on to my final thoughts. I definitely feel like Euphoria has changed a lot from where it started, just the overall aesthetics, vibes, and just the central message of the show. But I think there are some important lessons to take away from this season, even though it wasn't really consistent with the previous vibe of the show. I feel like everyone was empty inside. No one was truly satisfied with their life, all for different reasons. But they all pretended like they were happy. And I feel like only when they all came together were the moments where life truly felt vibrant or like they were happy. So I felt like that was kind of a universal truth and something that can be applied to real life, especially when you're talking about people that you grew up with and they kind of envision you to be one way, but now as you're an adult and growing into like your future and who you are as a person, sometimes it doesn't always align with who you were versus who you're trying to become. And that can kind of cause conflict between the people that know you. So, yeah. Thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to comment down below your thoughts on Euphoria. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to follow me on my other social medias on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads, all at Teen TV Deep Dive Podcast for more. Bye.